So there was 3 of us in the middle of the street. We weren't supposed to be there. We didn't have permits. And this cop car came by, slowly cruising, craning their neck, looking at what we were doing, and my worst fears were being confirmed. I looked at the people that were with me and I said, play it cool, and I definitely wasn't cool. And then in my periphery, as I saw the car turn around and come back, I looked at everyone and said, hey, don't say anything. I'm going to talk. I know just what to say. I did not know just what to say. We were here painting a crosswalk because the church had asked us to, and they had asked us to because the city didn't have a program to respond to these sort of things, and the crosswalk wasn't getting painted, the need was there, so we were just going to do it. So as the cop car came by, they pulled into a parking lot right next to us, and then they just started unloading like a tent and tables and stuff. We were doing this at a block party because the streets were already closed down, and we were doing it at the beginning of the block party. They weren't coming by to stop us. They were actually a booth at the block party. And the only time they would come over to watch us work, they came over to say thank you for what we were doing. I want to talk about the benefits of moving fast, but in a creative orientation. So often we hear this mantra of move fast and break things, as if innovation always has to come with collateral damage. And there's this other end of the spectrum that perfection and working towards something better has to be slow, and we can get this sort of perfection paralysis. But I agree with the long-standing designer previously at Apple, Johnny Ive, shout out to Blake for hooking me up with this podcast episode, where he said breaking stuff and moving on quickly leaves us surrounded by carnage. So I want to talk about a third way. My name is Jon Jon. I go by the Happy Urbanist online. You can find me at jonjon.jpg on Instagram and TikTok. I also have a Substack. It's completely free. There is a paid version, but you don't get anything from it. That's only if you wanted to support my work. And I also had this genius idea when I was so intimidated by creating a slide deck for a room full of creatives that I was like, you know what? I'm all about doing things quickly and imperfectly. I'm going to hand draw it to sort of convey my message. It took me like 3 times as long, so I hope you appreciate these crappy drawings. The one thing you need to know about me is I'm completely obsessed with cities. From a young age, I wanted to be an architect, and I looked at buildings as the biggest expression of human art. It's the biggest thing that we make that's an artistic expression of an individual. And the accumulation of these buildings, cities, are the biggest man-made thing. And I want you to be obsessed with cities. That's why I make content. I want you to be more obsessed with cities. And you might think, Jon Jon, you don't know how much I like cities. Well, I know that I like cities the most, and I want you to like them as much as me. So I talk about them. And one of the things about cities is they're constantly changing, but also have a sense of permanence. They seem like something that's very slowly and never changing. And throughout this talk, everything that I'm going to be talking about, all the anecdotes and analogies are going to be in the context of changing cities. But the principles, I think, apply like fractal patterns on a bigger and smaller scale, both for individuals, organizations, teams, as well. So this is problem. Problem is very big, and you are very small. That's your contributions. That's your potential contribution in your life, and that's the problem. Whether it's climate change, the company you want to start someday, bringing about world peace, solving world hunger, you're never going to be able to do it. And at some point in your life, when you figure this out, you're faced with your own finitude or mortality, and you have to realize that you're not going to be able to do it. And so with this, you find yourself on this spectrum. On one end, there's this dystopian view of life that no matter what you do, it's never going to be enough. And if you think about it, if you've bought into hustle culture, if you've tried to get more effective, to sleep less, to eat a certain way, you start realizing it's never going to be enough. But there's also this utopian vision that says everything's going to turn out all right. And though they seem like opposite ends of the spectrum, they're actually opposite ends of a horseshoe, where they have more in common than you might think. In particular, in a dystopian view, what motivates you to act if everything is going to end up doomed anyhow? And in a utopian view, why should you have to act if everything's going to end up perfect anyhow? So the point of this talk is going to be a concept known as Protopia. Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired magazine, futurist, he uses this term to define a worldview in which you believe that things can get better and that you can contribute to them. So if we go back to this problem of mortality, you cannot solve this problem, but you, with others, can solve this problem. So accepting our mortality is important in finding community in the meaning and purpose of our work. Now, move fast and fix things is juxtaposed to move fast and break things, but it also seems juxtaposed to rest. I'm going to be telling you to do more and to work faster. And for some of you, this might not be the message you need to hear. You might be already doing this or too much. But there was a mentor I had once who was telling me about rest, and I said, what is rest? He said, rest is not working. I was like, okay, I guess I rest a lot, but I don't feel rested. He goes, oh, also, thinking about work counts as work. I was like, okay, I'm not resting. And in this, we found out that doing things that required a lot of attention, like rock climbing and skateboarding, that was rest for me, because I couldn't not think about those things. So for some of you, I'm going to be talking about doing stuff that will be restful because it takes your mind off the stuff that feels like work. And anytime I use the term creativity, I'm going to be talking about a sort of moral creativity. I don't think creativity, innovation, or design are neutral. They're either good at promoting good or thwarting bad, or they're the opposite. But I don't think that they're neutral. If you Google this term, moral creativity, tell me what you find, because I made this up and I didn't even look it up. But it looks like a real definition. So at the end of the day, I'm thinking about this quote attributed to Dieter Rams. You do not understand good design if you do not understand people. Design is for people. So to lay the groundwork, speed is not inherently destructive, and that's what I want to point out today, that you can get started fast without expecting collateral damage, that you can embrace your mortality, and this is good because this is where you're going to find community, and then you need to embrace morality. This is also good for obvious reasons. So my first working title was Move Fast and Fix Things That Bring You Life, also is good for the world, so that even if you do burn out, the world is a better place because of it, and you probably won't burn out. Let's get started. So again, cities, obsessed with cities. This is the context. The whole premise of this talk we're going to do in two movements. So if I get done in time, we'll do some Q&A. Movement number one, immediacy. What is something that you can do today? Like, if you're someone who's like, I want to start a garden and it's the middle of December, we often think, okay, that's something I'm going to get started on later. But there are groundwork, things that you can do for your garden in December to be planning for it. So the first thing, in order to have this sort of life-giving creative action, you need something that you can do today. An example of this is going to be Jersey City. So Jersey City is one of the most densely populated communities in all of America. It is also one of the most diverse communities in all of America. And my friend, Barka Patel, is the head of infrastructure there. When she first got a job with the city, her and the mayor bought into this concept known as Vision Zero. Vision Zero is when a city commits to continue to improve their streets until there are 0 traffic-related fatalities, drivers, pedestrians, cyclists, for an entire calendar year. The year was 2017, and they were like, we're going to do what it takes to get this done by 2027. They gave themselves a 10-year runway. And she is the queen of do what you can with what you have. So this next drawing is going to be actually impressive, in part because I didn't draw it. So what happened when they decided to do this is they started to identify dangerous intersections throughout town. And I want you to look at this circle right here. This is what's known as a bulb out, all right? At intersections where a disproportionate amount of crashes happen, part of it happens because people park right here. It reduces visibility of pedestrians and cars, and you're more likely to hit them. People are just parking in to unload something for a second, or whatever, and it's illegal to do that throughout all of America. But if you put a bulb out there, they can't park there. It also shortens the span that pedestrians have to cross, and it forces cars to take slower turns. They identified one of the most dangerous intersections in their town, and it already had grant money to complete it. But she said, with this grant money, it's going to take 2 to 3 years to get it completed. If we want to hit our 10-year goal, we've got to do something right now. So they embraced this term known as tactical urbanism, where they painted the bulbs out using art and design. They took artists, had them create a design. They took the community students, and they had them paint it, so there was this community ownership. They put these plastic posts, which really, it's not going to stop a car from hitting you, but it's going to keep a car from parking there. And it keeps cars from taking this tighter turn. They did this, and then they copied and pasted everywhere there was a dangerous intersection. They didn't say, do we have funding for this? They said, is it dangerous? What can we do? That 10-year plan of hitting Vision Zero happened in less than 5 years. And in 2022, the city of Jersey City, twice the size of Chattanooga, had 0 car crashes, pedestrian or cyclist fatalities for an entire calendar year. But this isn't something that has to happen just on the city scale. You're like, well, that's great. She's a leader. She's the head of infrastructure. She can do this. I want to tell you about a story from a friend here in Chattanooga. I talk about this stuff all the time, so he sends me this picture, and I was like, what is this? He was like, that is a sidewalk that abruptly ends at a railway. There are blackberry brambles with thorns, and then it picks up again, and then there's a school parking lot. Kids that are walking to school are walking in the street. How can we get the city to do something about this? I said, just so you know, there's a project that's been greenlit, funded, approved, but it involves a railway crossing, and it's been put off for 3 years. I was like, if the city was ready to go tomorrow, it's gonna be 3 to 5 years before anything happens here. And he was like, well, what can we do today? I was like, okay, what's your budget? He's like, absolutely $0. I was like, good, let's figure this out. So the first thing, he went and took his battery-powered mower and mowed it. That's great, but it's lacking design. It's not intuitive that you should still walk there. I said, hey, I've got these colorful bricks I used for a project. You can have them. He said it's not enough, so he went and commandeered more out of a dumpster and painted them and then made this. But it's still unlevel, and you have to walk over the railroad tracks. Also, the railroad's inactive, so there's not like a train running over this. So then he went to a park and found some leftover mulch from the Parks and Outdoors department. Sorry, Blythe, if you meant to use that. And he made this with a sign. And so now, as a result of his tactical urbanism, and with doing it without permission, there is something that doesn't just help the people that are taking this crosswalk, but it also communicates to the people in the community. There's someone here, they care, and they're doing something about it. This is the type of work that gives life rather than takes it. And what about that crosswalk earlier? So first off, just to give you an example, that's the crosswalk we painted. The night before, I was Googling how to paint a crosswalk. All right, I was a philosophy major. The math courses I took in college were like math for the liberal arts major and physics in everyday life. Like I am not that exacting of a person, and that's how close we were to the police. But it worked out. And here's the light bulb moment about actions that happen immediately. You'll start to realize that no one knows what they're doing before they do it. You can figure something out by taking that action. So what is it that you can do immediately right now? Movement 1. Movement 2 is all about longevity. What action can you continue for the next 30 years? After this talk, I want you to Google the bike bus. The bike bus is an elementary school teacher in Portland, Oregon, who realized some studies that showed that children behave better and have more focus when they have some sort of physical activity before school. So he was like, I'm gonna start riding my bike to school from a certain location and invite students and teachers to join me. And now he does it with like speakers blaring, 120 plus kids show up. Justin Timberlake even joined him earlier this year. He's like on Good Morning America. He's like kind of a big deal. We've become friends, and I remember at one point he was realizing that I was nosediving and that what I was doing wasn't sustainable. And he said something to me, which is the tagline to this. He said, dude, you need to chill out. He was like, whatever you are going to be doing, you need to be able to do it for 30 years, because I want to be doing this with you in 30 years. And that's where this idea of longevity sort of clicked for me. So I want to give you another example from Chattanooga. How many of you are from outside of Chattanooga? Like you don't live here? Cool. When you go around, start noticing at bus stops, and you'll start seeing there's these crappy, crude, I shouldn't say crappy, but there's these crude wooden benches that are built in part because we have 1,200 bus stops across the county, but only 56 with provided shelters by the city. And so me and someone else had this idea, like apart from each other, to make benches for bus stops. But we were looking at it and saying, there's no way we can fund 1,200. So we started looking at dumpster wood and designing a bench so that whatever type of wood you have, it'll look similar to each other. We started connecting with our artist friends. This was done by that same guy that made the sidewalk. And we started painting them so that they would look good and last longer. And if you go across our city, you'll start to see the expressions of these benches and how different and how important they are to that community. This is one of my favorite. You can't really see on this screen, but we had an artist paint a doodle black on white, and then we took it to a library event, and kids colored it in. There's this ownership that's happening where when someone sees a bench that they helped make, they feel that sense of pride, especially when they see someone sitting on it. This is another example of tactical urbanism that we did completely anonymously because we had no idea how the city would react. It was sort of an indictment of their lack of action, saying if a few, 3 raccoons in a trench coat can get out and get some benches out there, what's keeping the city from doing the minimum viable product? This is one of my favorite ones. It's on UTC's campus, and it just says, this bench was left intentionally blank, place stickers everywhere. And it sort of has this there's always this constant state of stickers that are peeling and being added on and all this constant change. But the reason this points to longevity is it embraces that mortality and creates this sense of community. Throughout town, we started to see different benches popping up everywhere that weren't from us. They had a totally different design, and they were just showing up at bus stops because people realized something like, okay, maybe we can just do this without permission. But then there was this one bench, bright green, really well made, that started showing up en masse. And we found out that this person worked on the board of a nonprofit that gave him a $50 a month stipend and said, with $50 a month, I'm going to build one bench. This is longevity. I'm not trying to scale this. I'm not trying to maximize this. It is, I enjoy this. I like seeing this. I can do one a month. I'm going to do one a month. Well, this lady came and said, hey, I have a craft circle, and we want to paint some of your benches. Can you give us 4? He's like, it's going to take 4 months for me to get them to you. She said, if I buy the wood, will you let us do this? So he said, yeah. So you might see that some of this same design, they no longer are just straight green benches anymore. She came back and wanted more, and he's like, dude, I can't do this anymore. She's like, well, what can we do? She started engaging schools, and now this is a part of workforce development at different schools, and she's raised over $5,000 this year, and she is continuing on building these to the point where he no longer builds one bench a month. His full-time job is just to place these benches for her. And as of now, remember the city has 56 provided bus shelters with a bench. There are going to be upwards of 250 handmade benches from the efforts of 2 different groups, but primarily one person who is just saying, what can I do long-term that won't create burnout? We're getting to the point where it's hard to find places where these benches can be set and not be an impediment, but not to be deterred. That same guy started looking at the waste that was created specifically by these benches and designed these little transit boxes that can be more easily placed. So again, he took what was being used as waste for this wood, made something, and started placing them everywhere. This is what is meant by the embracing of your mortality, bringing about a sense of community. And if you're going to be in town tomorrow, a group is getting together to finish off some benches. Hit me up afterwards. You can help hang, you can come hang, paint benches, clean house, get ready for our next iteration. When I talk about this, I want it to be clear. The answer isn't simply less work, it's more meaningful work, made quickly and without pressure to be perfect. And it involves these 2 distinct and strong movements. The immediate work that you can do right now and the longevity of work that you can sustain over time. And this is what I mean by this idea of Protopia. Also, I'm done, but this is an epilogue. You probably should be considering working less anyhow. All right, thank you so much. Nick, how much time do we have? How much time do we have? Okay, cool. Awesome. So I want to open it up to questions. And then I also have something else I'm going to pull up that I didn't put in because I wanted to make sure I hit time. Anybody have any questions?
I have a question, but I don't know how to get it out.
Okay, just start talking.
So a lot of us work in organizations that expect certain levels of excellence, professionalism, those kind of things.
Yep.
What is it? I'd love to hear some thoughts on what it feels like to do what you have, do what you can with what you have, work fast, fix things, when it's also serving corporate organizations and boards, and they're expecting certain things. And again, I don't really know how to get that question out, but I think
Yeah, so the question is how does this apply to an organization where there's boards, investors, bosses, a certain level of professionalism. I got a great story for that. This is in my blood. I am like the most obedient, compliant child you've ever met. Like if you were to hear me cuss, in my head, I translated that cuss word from dang into damn. Like that's how I'm wired and how I think. This is the first time in my life that I've felt compelled to like break any rules, and it's so exciting. But how it happened in the corporate environment was I worked for this email software called Superhuman. Superhuman is a high-level, high brand tier, whatever you pay for email, you'll pay an extra $30 a month to use Superhuman. And it's a productivity thing, and it's a cool service. When I was working at Superhuman, our marketing was struggling, and I was like, we need a TikTok. And they're like, that's not really our group, that's not really on brand. I was like, no, we need a TikTok, and we just need to show people how to be more effective with their email. And they're like, why would we do that? Because if people are more effective with their email, why would they want Superhuman? I was like, come on, because the person who's Googling, how do I archive 10,000 messages on Gmail is frustrated with Gmail, and they might want the Superhuman add-on. And so I tried to get them to go for it. They wouldn't go for it. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to make that TikTok account. I won't represent Superhuman, but I'm just going to make a TikTok account showing this. I'd never worked in marketing before. I'd never done TikTok before. I'd helped some siblings because I sort of had a knack for like the algorithm, and I helped some siblings grow their account. So I was like, I'm going to start my own account. I started making email stuff, and I got 27,000 followers on TikTok following me on how to use Outlook and Gmail better. So then Superhuman comes to me and says, okay, we want to start a TikTok. The marketing company is going to do that, but we want you to consult. And it would take 2 weeks to get a video through the process because they are so brand specific. They are such a premium brand. And at one point, I left and I was like, TikTok's not for you if this is how you do it. A new marketer came in and said, I want you to name the most outrageous budget you can think of. What do you want to do? Do we have to fly to New York to do interviews on the street? Fly to San Francisco? Tell me what you need. I want TikTok to work. Because he had seen that I had done it. I said, how about this? No budget, no oversight. I make the videos I want to make. Give me 45 days. If I don't have 10,000 followers at the end of 45 days, I'll go back to being an onboarder, which is what I was at the company. He was like, yeah. I was like, dude, there's going to be typos. There's going to be like a blurry camera because I did use a front-facing camera and I didn't want to do another take. He was like, I trust you. Do it. 45 days later, we had 15,000 followers. They then hired me on full-time TikTok, and we grew the account to 50,000 followers before I quit and started my own thing. I think that's just an example of like, there wasn't an official process, so I did it unofficially, and I just proved the concept. But also, this ended up being the platform, because once the company was like, we're starting a TikTok, I was like, well, I don't want to talk about email anymore. I want to talk about cities. And so people woke up one day like following me for Outlook advice, and I was just like, build a bike lane, build more housing. But I didn't lose any followers. Like, they stayed around. It was great. In fact, once I started posting on the Superhuman account, people were like, wait, aren't you the city guy? And then on my account about cities, they're like, wait, aren't you the email guy? Yeah, great question. I also have another story about that, but does anybody else have any other questions? Cool, I'll go with this. This is a slide I cut for time, my favorite slide. Does anybody recognize this? Does anybody listen to 99% Invisible, the podcast? Okay, this is the Camden bench, called for a borough in London known as Camden, and this has 12 elements of what's known as hostile architecture. There are 12 aspects of design in this bench to disinhibit certain behaviors. So it's made on a slant with these waves so that you won't sleep in it. So we don't need a houseless population sleeping on it. That's great. There's this little alcove that you can stick your handbag underneath so that it's anti-robbery. Like you can put your legs in front of it. But the alcove isn't so deep that it could fit a backpack that someone could leave for a bomb. It's covered with a polymer that makes it hard to graffiti on. It has these organic waves so that you can't skate it. But the design and the hostile architecture is defining what you can't do in this area. Remember that pathway my friend made that said somebody in this area cares about you? This design is screaming, here's what you can't do. And it defines a place in a negative aspect. So that even if these elements of design are ingenious and work towards that end, there's this anti-social message that's being sent that this place isn't safe, look out for robbers, look out for terrorists, look out for skateboarders, and somehow they're all in the same playing field. But to answer your question, there was a city, Lafayette, Louisiana, and they had a problem. They had a park which died during COVID and never came back to life. Part of the reason it never came back to life is that the gazebo became a hotspot for the houseless population. And this downtown development group was working with the city, and the city's like, how do we bring this park back to life? Now, they could have had two options. Hostile architecture. What can we build into the design to get these people out of here? Or they could have said, we just need to hire more police and make more arrests and do sweeps until people understand there's not going to be any houseless people here. But this group had a different idea. They said, you know who used to come here a lot? Skateboarders. What if we made this a great place for skateboarders? They got a contract with the city saying, hey, we have an idea that could bring people back. It's going to be 3 benches. And the city's like, what? They're like, trust us, it's going to be 3 benches. What they didn't tell the city is these benches are going to be for skateboarders. They went to the local skate shop and said, we have $6,000. We can do 3 benches. Help us make something that will bring skateboarders back to this area. So this is what they proposed to the city, and the city bought it having no idea what they were doing. That was their bench. Now what happened? Skateboarders started showing up, and they were a social lubricant that made families feel safe to show up to the park again. They didn't kick out the houseless population. They invited in formerly disenfranchised people, and the design spoke to, this is for you. Look at the corners. And after it was a success, they came out publicly in an article saying, yeah, we designed it that way, and it blew people's minds. Now there's a skate park in Lafayette, so the skateboarders don't come here as much, but they still do come after hours when it's not as busy. And the reason they don't come during regular hours is because it worked, and it's so busy there. There's a splash pad, there's a brand new park, there's all of this. And the other thing is, it is a good bench. You can lay down on it. A good concept in urban design is that if you want people to sit on something, it needs to be between 16 and 19 inches tall. And that's 17 inches tall. If you start looking around at places where there's like a flower box, then grass, if it's between 16 and 19 inches tall, the grass will be dead because people sit there and eat their lunch. And this is the idea of the opposite of hostile architecture, and it's working within that system, and it's being a little bit sneaky about it, and they were able to bring this about. And then once they did, they came public and said, we meant for this all along. That's great. Awesome. Any more questions? Yeah. If you're passionate specifically about cities, the number one thing you can do is, consider seating. So a few years back, the head of the New York City Parks and Rec Department was speaking at our city. And they were speaking to a bunch of officials within the mayor's office, city council, they were all there. And he had this line, and he said, cities are constantly removing seating as a way to discourage antisocial behavior. He goes, but if you don't have enough seating, that's your mark as a city to build more, not to remove what you had. And chills went up my spine because just 2 weeks earlier, the city had removed like 9 benches and tables and chairs in order to discourage homeless people in a certain part of our city. So I went up and talked to him afterwards, and I was like, hey, I'm really glad you said that. It was very timely. And he's like, I had no idea that was a situation. I didn't come here to stir the pot. I wouldn't have said that if I had known. I'm not that type of guy. And I remember thinking, well, I am that type of guy. So me and that same artist that built the sidewalk made this really big bench that said, this bench is illegal, but it shouldn't be. And we put it right where one of those benches were that the city had removed. And it got over 3 million views on TikTok in 24 hours. And within 72 hours, the city had replaced that bench. And that actually is what sparked the bench building movement, because we had been in a garage kind of working on benches, but that's what got people to show up. So seating is one thing. We're moving into a realm where we're painting crosswalks. There's a group out of LA that does this. They paint crosswalks, and if the city notices them, the city will come and tear them up. The city that doesn't have the resources to build the crosswalks will come and tear them up. Anytime that happens, they film it, and they use that as PR to fund making more crosswalks. If the city doesn't notice it, and the crosswalks start to deteriorate, they 311 the city, telling them they need to repaint the crosswalk, and the city comes and paints a crosswalk. A city won't paint a new crosswalk if you ask, but they will a lot of times go and maintain crosswalks that already exist. So that's something else that's sort of happening, but you won't see that be as public. Blythe, please don't tell anybody. But also, we're working with the city right now And in August, we are going to be Highland Park is going to be one of the first neighborhoods to get a private grant to change public property, to change the public realm, to slow down cars on a public street using tactical urbanism, what Barca did. We're using an application process that already exists, that's labor intensive, but our goal is to reduce the friction, and so that if you see something, you can say, hey, I want to do this, apply to the city, and you can make the changes yourself. And then after a year, if it's doing good, the city can adopt it as official infrastructure. If it's not doing what it was intended to do, you either change it or remove it. But yeah, Chattanooga Urbanist Society, if you live in Chattanooga, just follow them, and we always have stuff to do. We're doing stuff this Saturday. Cool. Awesome. Anything else? Kenny's a good friend of mine, and he also knows I'm a bit of a hypocrite because I'm always borderline burnout because anytime I make space and bandwidth, I usually fill it up. And he asked about what decisions I've made about working less. In 2019, we were visiting Chattanooga and lived in Colorado at the time. So we moved back here in 2020. I grew up in East Tennessee. And I was applying for this dream job. And I told my wife, Megan, who's in the back there, who also, oh, did this get cut? Did I do that? Maybe I did that. It looks like it's on. Okay. At any rate, well, two funny stories. One, I stained my shirt, and then she showed up wearing one of my shirts. So this was a shirt she showed up with. So thank you for coming, baby. Secondly, in 2019, I had realized that I had reached the financial pinnacle of what I needed to be happy, and I wanted more free time to spend with my family doing things that I cared about. And so I had this dream job I was applying for, and I was like, you know what? Even if I don't get this job, I'm quitting my job. And then 2 hours later, I got the email that I didn't get the job. And I went and quit the job. And then the pandemic happened, and the company I worked for was a remote technology, so they took off. But I remember, despite getting a 50% pay cut, despite getting furloughed 3 weeks after the pandemic, I was the happiest I had ever been. And since then, all of my decisions about my career have been, what can I do to get more freedom at the financial level that I want to be at, which is less than a lot of people, which is more than what some people make. But for me, it's been really freeing. And as of last year, I'm full-time speaking, consulting, and TikTok content making. And I think a big reason for that is I drew a line in the sand, and I can always see when I go above or below that line. Does that answer it? Okay, cool. Awesome.